Well, thanks for your question, Matt. It's interesting because I think, on one hand, awakenings can have a huge impact on us as seekers. So, especially like the first one, two, or three, or the first one, because if when you have your awakening, it can really give you some kind of faith in the teaching, or it can at least show you, demonstrate to you in your own experience that there is something beyond just the average everyday experience. And that can be very, very motivating. It can be very inspiring. And it can make something that was previously just intellectual or just something you're reading about in books or hearing someone else say, now something more real. And that has value. Of course, there are traps there, because what tends to happen is then the mind says, oh, wow, that was an amazing experience. I want some of that again. I want to re-feel, re-experience that. And then we chase the experience. And that can go on for a long time. And that's because the mind works in terms of objects. The mind is always thinking, I was saying, wasn't I, before? Well, what's it thinking about? It's always thinking about objects, gross and subtle objects. We can call it experiences, same thing. So the mind will latch onto any experience, any feeling, any sensation, and then talk about it and think about it and chase it and get frustrated. As long as the mind just wants to think. Usually the awakenings are when the mind has dropped away. So that's one significance, is that it can be a hugely inspiring, motivating thing. And it can give you a lot of faith in something that perhaps you weren't so sure about before, but then you have an experience. You're like, wow, actually, there's really something to this. I wasn't sure if there's anything to this, all this meditation stuff. There's really something to it. But then that teaching, oh, it's an experience, is also totally correct. It's totally true. It's just an experience. It comes and goes. Realization, deep, deep realization, is not an experience. It's not an experience. It's in every experience. It's findable in every experience. It's constant. It pervades, permeates, and penetrates every experience all the time, eternally, always. And it is unchanged through all experience. The realization is unchanged, always. It's always present, unchanged, untouched. Just like the mirror and the reflection. The reflection represents the world of things, the body, the mind, the world. And the mirror represents our true nature. The mirror is there, pervading the entire reflection. Whatever you're looking at in the reflection, the mirror is there. The realization is there. It's nothing to do with the reflection, in the sense that it's no particular aspect of the reflection. If the reflection you're looking at happens to be like a person wearing a blue top and black trousers, the realization has got nothing to do with the blue top or the black trousers. If you change your clothes, you wear something else, the realization will still be there. If you're feeling good, if there's happiness, realization is there. If there's sadness, realization is there. It's beyond it. This is what we mean by transcendent. So realization is transcendent and immanent. Immanent means it's also the reflection. If you look at the reflection, you're looking at the mirror. The reflection here represents the relative. The mirror represents the absolute. The reflection here represents the immanent, which means what's apparent. And the mirror represents the transcendent, means what's beyond the apparent. And if you look at the immanent, the picture on the screen, you're actually seeing the screen. If you're looking at the reflection, you're actually seeing the mirror. This is the realization. It's deep, it's non-verbal. It doesn't change, even when all the experiences are coming and going. The mind, if you're listening to the mind, also called thinking, that's also, when you're listening to the mind, we also call that thinking. If you're paying attention to the ego, also known as thinking, then the ego is pretending to be you, and ego is controlling you. And the ego is looking and thinking about, the ego is talking. The ego is always talking about objects or experiences. It's trying to get this, get that, get away from this, get away from that. We call that attraction and aversion, desire and fear. Desire means you're trying to go towards something, attraction or desire, and fear or aversion means you're trying to get away from something, objects, usually experiences. So in this way, experiences or awakenings are traps for the ego to chase, and then the negative feeling things we have are feeling states that the ego wants to avoid or go away from. But the ego doesn't care if it's afraid or if it's attracted. It just wants the attention. It just wants the center stage. As long as you're engaged with thinking, the ego is happy. Yeah? So when you're afraid, you might be thinking, oh, I hate this. I hate being afraid. And the ego will be telling you, oh, I don't like this. This is awful. But the ego loves it. Ego doesn't care if you're feeling fear or desire, because you're paying attention to it. This is what I mean by disingenuous. It sounds strange for me to say this. It's almost like I'm talking like the ego is an outside entity coming in. But if you inquire into this and you look at your mind, you'll see this is the case for yourself. Or you'll have the same insight, but you might word it differently. You feel free to reword the insights in your own language. This is what I do. I express it in the language that comes naturally to me. You might find a better way to express it, or a different way to express it, or a better way for you to express it. Which doesn't make it sound like the ego is some sort of third party that's coming in to control you, like Satan or the devil, which is another way we can phrase it. So that's a bit about awakenings. The other thing we can talk about awakenings might be useful to some of you to think of, again, this is the way my mind works, you see. I've not seen this written anywhere, but it's just something I've noticed. Awakenings tend to happen, let me see if I get this right, because I haven't thought about it for a while. Yeah, tends to happen in sort of one of two or three ways. Awakenings can either happen in the dimension of time, in which case it feels like the sense of time falls away. This is one form of awakening. And you get a sense of timelessness that dominates. Sometimes a sense of location, of being local, of being located in a specific geographical place in your awareness, like in the body. Sometimes a sense of location can fall away. So you don't feel like you're local, you feel like you're everywhere. And that can dominate the awakening experience. And sometimes the sense of being an individual person can fall away. So time, person, place. Now in medicine, when we're doing mental health assessments and mental state assessments, I should say, we often check if somebody's orientated in these three dimensions. Do they know where they are? Do they know who they are? and where they are, who they are, and when they are. When I say when they are, they might not know they're in the year 2021. They might think they're in 1983 or something, you know. These three things are all related to our thinking and our ego and the way we orientate ourselves. And when the thinking process falls away, often one of these dimensions falls away more predominantly than the others. And it's just useful to note that. In liberation, all of these three collapse into each other. So the sense of time goes, the sense of being local goes, the sense of being an individual goes. And what's left is indescribable. We can call it oneness, we can call it non-duality, call it liberation, call it freedom, call it God, divine, guru, precious, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. But within the appearance, the body-mind still appears to function within these parameters. So Tom looks like he's functioning in time. He feels like a individual person located. You know, that's how it'll appear. So within the appearance, that functioning still continues. The subjective experience is it's all collapsed into itself, in on itself. So yeah, most people they'll tend to, when they have an awakening experience, they'll tend to latch on to one of these three dimensions. Should I talk more about awakening? I can carry on. Something else about awakenings I'll share. I've already hinted at it, or maybe said it. Awakenings tend to happen when thought is no longer functioning temporarily. And that happens spontaneously to many people at points in their life. And when thought is not functioning, then there's no thought sense of time. The thinking is not thinking about time, not thinking about location, not thinking about who they are, because there's no thought. So awakenings tend to happen more when you're doing an activity where there's less likely to be thought. Let me explain. Have I explained this before in this group? I can't remember. Right. Things like, okay, let's just have some simple things. Things like if you're playing sports. If you're playing sports and you're really focused, then your normal thinking mind where you're thinking about what am I going to do on Tuesday? Oh, I'm worried about this presentation I've got to do on Friday. Oh, who am I meeting? All that kind of chatter is gone because you're focused on playing sports. So awakening, and this is like flow states. Flow states are like a lower form of awakening because the sense of doership usually, in flow state, the sense of time is still present usually, but the sense of doership usually falls away. And that's why it's described as a flow state. But the sense of space and time will usually still continue. The sense of being a person might still continue as well. You still feel like you're the body-mind, but that you're not doing it. It's just happening. Sports, music, drugs, sex, walking in nature, watching a sunset. These are all things that tend to reduce our thinking. Also, if trauma as well, if you are shocked, if you are scared, if something very frightening happens, something very terrible happens to you, it can shock you. And in that moment of shock, in that moment of trauma, it can disrupt your thinking. And that can give rise to awakening. So any of these things that can lead to reduction in your thought, and for some reason, a combination of events come together, and your thought just completely drops away, and one or more of these dimensions of time, person, place drop away, then you'll tend to have an awakening. Now, the problem with that, so when that happens, then you get this deep experience or insight. Oh my gosh, time stopped. Oh my gosh, I wasn't there. I was there 1 second, I wasn't there another second. Oh my gosh, I wasn't here, I was everywhere. I was one with everything, you see? The unity experience. That's when the sense of localization drops away. What's the problem with this? The problem is it's essentially a chance event. Yeah, you took the drug, maybe you're dancing to some music and something else happened at the same time, and a combination of these chance events meant the thought process fell away, the ego fell away, and you had an awakening. It's not sustainable. It's all dependent on objective phenomena. The awakening itself is dependent on an objective phenomenon, whether it's the drug, whether it's drugs, whether it's sex, whether it's music, whether it's sport. And these things come and go. The vasanas come back, you see. The habitual tendency to pay attention to thinking and to believe that thinking is you, to believe that you are the ego, to believe that you are the body mind comes back. And that starts controlling life again. So unless there's a sustained way to remove the vasanas, which is nididhyasana, which is self-inquiry, which is meditation, that's the way to remove the vasanas over time, usually. Without some sustained practice, that awakening, that what was a short-lived awakening, will not give any fruition, will not lead to any sustained awakening. I don't know how well I've explained that. I hope that makes sense. But without the practice, without the nididhyasana, for most people, the vasanas come back, and the whole time, person, place construct comes back. And then the seeking comes back. And then the seeking that awakening experience, which is now a memory of a sensation. The thought, you see, is interacting with memory. And then chasing a memory or running away from a memory. That's the aversion or attraction. And then chases it, and then we're back into thinking, back into ego. So the awakening never becomes something that we are living, because it's based on these chance things. And then people get really into whatever drug they were taking or whatever activity they were doing. You know, if it was when they were having sex, maybe they get really into tantric sex. If it was drugs, then maybe get really into sort of psychedelics. Now, luckily for Tom it happened when he was reading a book. So it wasn't such a precarious activity, you know? So what did I get into? I got into reading books. I don't know. I consider myself lucky. Maybe some people would have thought, oh, poor Tom. You know. So I consider myself lucky it happened when I was reading a book, because I then started reading loads of books. And in terms of all the things it could be, you know, for a lot of people, it's things like drugs or whatever it happens to be. Or it can be some crazy spiritual cult you're going to, you know, where they sort of were chanting and meditating. And when you're chanting and meditating strongly and deeply, you get these awakenings. But maybe the actual cult or whatever you're going to is not a great cult. And that, you know, I'm just giving examples. I mean, maybe it's a wonderful organization that's happening in that as well, which is obviously a good thing. So